What's up, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. You're tuning in live on GrandstandSportsNetwork.com, as well as Facebook, the official Thomas Take Sports Podcast, Twitter at Thomas Takeover, and the official Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel. Once again, I'm Ryan Thomas, your host, coming to you live, 4 o'clock show today, March 8th, actually, is it March 8th? I have so many issues with dates lately. March 9th. Here we are, March 9th in 2018. We're getting closer to NFL draft time. We're getting closer to the start of baseball season, which I have finished my Dynasty League draft, 40-round draft, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, on another episode. Then we're also going to be, obviously talking about the draft, but I wanted to put the focus on two new additions to the Buffalo Bills, and I've talked about each addition separately in previous podcast episodes, but I want to look at this from a different angle and look at Vontae Davis compared to Chris Ivory. Why did each of these players choose Buffalo? Why was Buffalo the team that they specifically wanted to go to after visiting with several other teams in the National Football League, which even for moves that I believe are true depth moves in Vontae Davis and Chris Ivory, neither of these players are going to immediately, share a lion's share of the starting load. I think Vontae Davis could more so than Chris Ivory, but they're depth additions, right? Vontae Davis is not the number one corner of the Buffalo Bills. Chris Ivory is not the number one running back of the Buffalo Bills, and that's what I mean by that. These are two good, solid depth additions, in my humble opinion, and I want to kind of look at why did Vontae Davis and Chris Ivory choose Buffalo. It goes without saying that the Buffalo Bills were able to make the playoffs this year. They didn't have high expectations. Fans didn't have high expectations. I think the Bills players, the Bills staff were high on themselves, thinking that they could make this happen. But did we really believe them when they told us that? No, we did not. The fact that they did, I think, sent a message to a lot of veteran players around the league that what they have building here with Coach Sean McDermott is something special due to the fact that they're an overachieving bunch that has a good mix of young talent and a great mix of veteran talent. So these two veterans in particular took notice and said, well, these guys last year went 9-7. They went one and done in the playoffs, but realistically, they're an up and coming team in the AFC East. You look at the forecast of the AFC East division. We don't know how long New England is going to be on top in terms of Miami. We don't know what direction they're going to go in. They're kind of a hodgepodge team right now, and the New York Jets are a hodgepodge team right now. So Buffalo, looking to really jump into that upper echelon, the 1B to the Patriots 1A to eventually become the 1A in the AFC East once again. And it's going to be very hard for them to do that, but knowing that they have the trust and the commitment from other veterans around the league in evaluating whether they should play here or not, and then ultimately choosing to play here, I think that's pretty big, that the fact that these veteran players noticed throughout the season what the Bills were able to do this past year, and that is a far cry from the team that we were, let's just say, 2-3 years ago. We had a coach that quit. We had another coach that was a little bit in over his head in terms of the defense, in terms of Rex Ryan. And we have a new coach, last year coming in, first-year head coach, that really defied any and all expectations by most Bills fans. I thought that they'd have a productive year. I, said in the Huddle magazine when I was with the Rock Sports Report that they would go 8-8, and I was the closest to being right out of any of the analysts on that magazine. I looked back at it and thought, holy moly, I was actually pretty spot on in terms of my game projections. And I'm not even saying it to toot my own horn. That was the best case scenario. Worst case scenario was they finished 5-11 or 4-12. Both were, seen as likely in the eyes of 50% of their fan base. They did better than that. They finished 9-7. They had to beat the Miami Dolphins in order to make it. They had to have Baltimore lose to the Cincinnati Bengals, and those things happened in order for Buffalo to make the playoffs. But in particular, why did these two players choose Buffalo? Vontae Davis visited all around the NFL, landscape. Chris Ivory would have been a veteran running back that I'm sure would have got work elsewhere. Why did they choose Buffalo? And in my opinion, the reason why is due to the fact that they know that something is different with this Buffalo Bills organization, with this Buffalo Bills staff, and especially with this Buffalo Bills head coach that is different from those of years past. And we see veteran players come over from other teams. Whether they're going to have a starting role or not, that could only start a domino effect for other players to have interest in coming here. And I'm very excited about the prospects of that. Very excited, to say the least. Chris Ivory is a solid addition. I think he's going to, be the number 2, number 3 running back. If Marcus Murphy, plays a little bit better than him come training camp or come, regular season, we could expect some very interesting things to take place here at One Bills Drive during training camp time. We really could. And I think that that's easily doable for Marcus Murphy to come out of the woodwork and show what he's made of and show that he's a better player than what he even showed last year, which in a very limited sample size, I thought Marcus Murphy was pretty damn good. And in a limited sample size, Chris Ivory was more hit or miss. So then Vontae Davis, originally drafted in the first round by the Miami Dolphins, traded. I remember he was traded on Hard Knocks, where Joe Philbin told him he was going to be traded. The then Dolphins head coach at the time tells Vontae Davis that he's going to be traded, and Vontae says, "Can I call my grandma?" That was his first reaction, which was a famous scene in Hard Knocks. So Vontae has moved around. He's had some injuries. And moving from the Dolphins to the Colts to now the Buffalo Bills, he's made his rounds in the AFC North and the AFC East. And I think he's going to be a 2 or a 3 to 4 corner. I don't know if he's going to be their number 2 corner, which is commonly a misconception by Bills fans. I don't think it takes them necessarily out of the cornerback 2 chase by going after a guy like Vontae Davis. I think Vontae Davis was a move that they felt they needed to make due to the locker room. And I really want to talk about Sean McDermott here as well. I've watched the Scouting Combine press conference, and I've really liked the way he has articulated himself. I've always talked about how Sean McDermott is probably the best communicator in terms of a head coach that the Bills have had in quite some time. Even in negative situations, it seems as if Sean McDermott is able to turn it into a positive. The whole world knows that Tyrod Taylor will most likely not be their quarterback come 2018. But Sean McDermott has answered the questions with class, with grace, and has given the answers that you could only expect from a classy head coach, not a classless head coach like some. So really, what's next? I mean, I've talked about the running back position. They checked off that box. Talked about the corner position. They've checked off that box. Really, what I'm looking at in terms of free agency, there are some solid wide receivers in this year's free agency. Will they go after one of them? Who knows? There are some solid quarterbacks in this year's free agency, and I know that the hot topic right now is for Buffalo to trade up for a quarterback, but, really, I mean, if they went out and got Case Keenum and signed him to a 2-3 year deal, I wouldn't be opposed to that. Even if they went after a Teddy Bridgewater, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. In the event that they want to draft somebody as well, go both directions. Why does it have to be narrowed down to one or the other? That's my motto on that. So, all in all, the fact that Chris Ivory came here, the fact that Vontae Davis came here, 2 guys that I think they just haven't found their home in their careers yet. And maybe in the last few years of both of these gentlemen's careers, they can say that they've found a home in the National Football League, and hopefully they are embraced by Buffalo, and hopefully they play very well in the red, white, and blue for the Buffalo Bills. I'm very excited for this offseason. As always, I'll have you all covered on virtually anything and everything in terms of the NFL Draft. 32 picks in 32 days. We'll be back. It starts March 25th, the season premiere of 32 picks in 32 days, which is a segment that is presented by yours truly, Ryan Thomas of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. The Thomas Take Sports Podcast presents 32 Picks in 32 Days, March 25th. Premieres the second season of that, and it will premiere with the Cleveland Browns. Who do I believe the Cleveland Browns should take first overall? I've kind of touched on that a little bit, but there's plenty more to talk about in terms of the state of the franchise that is the Cleveland Browns. So for everybody that wonders, hey, what type of podcast is this? Is this a sports podcast that focuses on mixed martial arts or the Buffalo Bills? No, this is a sports podcast that focuses on the wide variety of sports that are offered on this planet, whether it's mixed martial arts, whether it's boxing, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the MLB, whether it's NHL. Not as into the NBA as I used to be back when 23 on the Bulls was playing, but I try to keep up with it as best as I can, and I will be on the My Fantasy Podcast almost every Wednesday starting in April, due to the fact that I will have Wednesdays off for some community service activities for good reasons, coaching Little League Baseball. So that'll be pretty fun. To say the least, I'm very excited. There's a lot of great things happening with this show. The fact that it's on GrandstandSportsNetwork.com. Eric Turner of Cover One Sports has been fantastic with his scouting reports. Talking to Chad of the DieByTheBlade.com, which is an amazing Sabres website, a website that I didn't even know he was the editor of until we started talking, and that's a site that I've followed for quite some time. So very excited, to say the least. Big things are happening, and people are tuning in, so I really appreciate it. Why do I believe that Vontae Davis and Chris Ivory chose Buffalo? I point the finger at one man, Sean the Mac Daddy McDermott. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take. Take care, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.